Good morning and welcome to this week's View on Africa. My name is Omar Mahmoud. I'm a senior researcher with the ISS, the Institute for Security Studies here in Addis Ababa, and looking mostly at issues in the Horn of Africa. And so that's one of the topics of discussion today. We're going to look at Somaliland and its parliamentary election process. Recently conducted a field trip, research trip out there, and looking at a number of issues, but this is one of them. So I think the first question is, what is the current status here of Somaliland's parliamentary elections? So we know they've been delayed. In January, the Girthi, or the upper house of Somaliland's parliament, announced that the elections would be postponed until December 2019. Now this builds on a number of delays. Most recently, they were supposed to be held in March of this year, but really this vote has been postponed at least 5 times over the past decade, more or less. The first and only vote for Somaliland's lower house of parliament was in 2005. So that means those members of parliament have been in power now for 14 years without a check on their performance. So it's been a series of delays and a number of reasons for that, but this is also part of a larger process. So delaying this aspect pushes back the rest. These lower house parliamentary elections were supposed to occur in concert with local council elections as well, while the new selection process for the Girthi, or the upper house, is also supposed to occur a year after the parliamentary elections. And so that was originally scheduled for 2020 as well, but now that process is put in question a little bit, given that the parliamentary elections, the lower house, have been delayed as well. But the schedule for December is also a bit unclear. The National Electoral Commission, which is overseeing this, the NEC in Somaliland, has said that they need 10 months to prepare the elections from a technical side in terms of doing all the necessary work on that aspect. But there's still no clear agreement in Somaliland between their political parties. So in Somaliland's political system, only 3 political parties are allowed. There's the Kulmiye, which is governing currently. There's Wadani, which is the main opposition, and then there's Uhid, which is also another opposition party, but a much smaller one. So the dynamic very much comes down to Wadani versus Kulmiye. And one of the clear problems has been that Wadani has been pretty clear, pretty consistently saying that they won't work with the current NEC, the current commission. So a lot of the commission's work is stalled, and it's not sure if they'll meet their deadline. There's a lot of discussions ongoing in Somaliland about this dynamic, but given that the NEC requires at least 10 months to prepare these elections, time is running out for that to happen in December of this year. So I think the next question maybe we should look at is, why is this process so contentious? And I think the roots of it really lie if you look back at the 2017 presidential election in Somaliland. Now, that contest was generally considered quite well run. In terms of there were some interesting achievements, such as the use of an iris scanner for the first time in Africa to do voter registration, to cut down on issues like multiple registration, which had been an issue in the past. And generally, most observers agree that the contest itself was decently well run. It had major stakes, as former President Solana was stepping down, so no matter what, you were going to have a change of power, and with Wadani and Kulmiye being the major contenders, and both very much expecting to win. But that was very much, even though it was generally well run, a divisive contest. And there was a number of protests in the immediate aftermath, and Wadani had suspended his participation with the NEC as well, and then even a few individuals unfortunately died in these protests, especially after Wadani said they wouldn't accept the results. And then eventually they came around and accepted the fact that they lost this election, or at least I should say they accepted that the election happened and that they weren't going to contest it in terms of that dynamic. So they kind of were saying that we don't necessarily agree with the results, but for the greater good, we're going to move forward. So, and even though the process was well run, there was definitely some irregularities, but not to the point where observers would agree that they would have influenced the results one way or the other. But there were issues such as underage voting and these sorts of dynamics as well, and some other complaints that Wadani has currently or consistently brought to the forefront. But the issue now, moving from 2017 to 2019, is that both sides have kind of backed themselves into a corner. Wadani has insisted that vote in 2017 was unfair and really sold their constituents on the fact that that's why they lost. So they can't really accept that the current commissioners of the NEC, of the National Electoral Commission, continue in their capacity to oversee voting preparation for the next election, given that this would really undercut their argument. Now, on Kulmiye, on the ruling party's side, it's a little difficult for them also to accept Wadani's demand for a new set of commissioners, because that then raises questions about the legitimacy of their vote and their electoral victory in 2017. So a compromise needs to be created in order to avoid a continuation of this stalemate, which has dragged on and now forced this election to be postponed for a fifth time, and in what is really an important election, given the fact that these parliament members have been in power for so long. So I think that brings us to the question of what needs to be done now. And at heart is the increasing divisiveness of Somaliland politics and the failure to heal some of these divides after the 2017 contest. I think a lot of observers will agree that politics has become a bit more clan-centric or clan-based, and it's taken a bit more of a winner-take-all, zero-sum mentality than before. And that's really hindered some of the aspects and played out now. So a compromise over the composition of the NEC needs to be reached. Now the interesting thing is their mandate is scheduled to expire in October this year anyway. But waiting until then means that a whole new NEC will have to come in and we'll need quite some time to prepare for the elections as well, delaying them even further. And there's also a bit of concern about delaying these elections too long to avoid getting tied into the elections that will be taking place in the rest of Somalia in the end of 2020 and the beginning of 2021. Somaliland, of course, views itself as an independent entity with a strong democratic record, and so it doesn't really want to get associated with that process. But on a more practical level, there's also concerns about donor funding and donor fatigue, and whether donors will really support two distinct election processes in Somalia so close to each other. Also, before the election needs to happen, there's a number of other agreements that need to be dealt with as well. A new electoral law is supposed to be in the works. There's issues in terms of guaranteeing minority and women's representation into Parliament. There's currently very few female parliamentarians, and so this has been an issue for Somaliland. Without some sort of quota process, how do you guarantee female participation? In terms of minority representation, it's a very similar dynamic, but there's also a larger issue in terms of a bit of a restructuring of some of the balance of power within Parliament. So there's demands from communities in Somaliland's east and also west that want to relook at the representation dynamics and feel maybe they should have a bigger say. On top of that is, of course, the technical preparations of these elections, which are going to be much more complicated than the presidential vote that occurred in 2017. Now, that was a vote between three candidates. and it was very clear between three different candidates and the three different parties. Now you're going to have 82 spots open in the lower house up for grabs across the country, plus local council elections. So it's a much more intense process, and it requires very, very detailed and specific technical arrangements. So again, before any election is conducted, those will have to be facilitated in a very clear manner. So I think there's a lot to do there ahead of the elections, and that raises concerns about further delays, as December is not too far off as well, and we've seen a track record of delays in this process and what that means for greater Somaliland democratic record. I would say that, I think part of this process demonstrates the strength of Somaliland's democratic record, which really is enviable within this region, this Horn of Africa region. It's unmatched and unparalleled. The fact that there are these discussions going on between the opposition and the government, and that neither can move forward without each other, is a very positive dynamic in its own regard. Yet the failure to consolidate some of this democratic record and really routinize it is leading to some of the problems we have in the process today, and why we see these constant delays, of which we have another series of and no end in sight. So there's also the issue of consolidating some of these aspects that I think Somaliland will have to work on going forward, especially in a less divisive manner than perhaps the 2017 election brought about. So thank you again for tuning in to this view on Africa, and we'll be following the issues closely and in terms of the elections and when they actually do occur.